This is Michael Bracy from the Music Policy Forum, joining you from just outside of Washington, D.C. Today is January 22nd, 2021, and we're thrilled to welcome you to this Friday's edition of Music Policy Forum Live, our weekly conversation program where we talk to advocates and industry leaders and policymakers and musicians and all sorts of other stakeholders who are concerned about the state of the music industry, the state of the music community, and how we can build and strengthen stronger and more equitable music ecosystems. As always, we are so appreciative of you spending some of your Friday with us. We know you have a lot on your plate and everyone is super crazy busy. And the idea of hanging out in Zoom programming is getting exhausting. It's already been exhausting for a long time. But we know you have choices with how to spend your time, and we're very appreciative that you are with us. Today is going to be another program that we're incredibly excited about. We're going to be focusing on the sort of the emerging voices in music activism and advocacy, and the state of play on Capitol Hill, and what things look like as we move towards COVID recovery and the future. Before we welcome our guests, as always, we're going to begin with some news updates and some general housekeeping. As everybody knows who is watching this program, it's been a month. It's been quite a couple of weeks, and our first program back was 2 days after an insurrection. The following week was 2 days after an impeachment, and today, of course, is 2 days after an inauguration. It's a new day in Washington, both literally and metaphorically. We have seen the Biden administration come in, working sort of at an extraordinary pace in terms of trying to implement plans related to COVID relief. Our producer, Alex Dolvin, will put into the chat some information throughout the show, but the Biden team's 200-page COVID strategy, which is kind of a remarkable document. Depending on how you read it, it'll hit you a lot of different ways. Kind of remarkable that it took this administration to develop something like that we haven't seen that yet from our previous administration. But I think more importantly, looking forward, there's some remarkable and interesting information as it relates to the music community and all the work that we've done at Music Policy Forum and elsewhere about reopening every venue safely and as quickly as possible. So some really interesting conceptual language about providing support for small business, technical assistance, resources to get us all up and running as quickly and safely as we can. We're also seeing the administration come together in terms of appointments, in terms of leadership. Again, this is a process which will take some time and it'll be more complicated than traditional administrations, in part due to just the divided nature of Washington and the complication around the transition. And of course, what we've seen with the impeachment trial coming next week. But we are starting to see the pieces come into place. One appointment that we are thrilled about and very happy to celebrate, that's going to have a very dramatic impact on the music community, is the president's decision to name Jessica Rosenworcel as the interim chair of the Federal Communications Commission. Again, many of you have seen Commissioner Rosenworcel, now Chair Rosenworcel, speak at previous conferences that we've hosted, either at South by Southwest or in Washington, D.C. She is a longtime advocate for the music community. Her brother is a professional musician. He plays in the band Guster, but she has understood the needs of the music community for a long time, and is going to be a champion on key issues ranging from media ownership and who gets to sort of what does the commercial and non-commercial radio landscape look like, to reinstating net neutrality rules. And I think taking off our music hat and putting on our human hat, she has been, I think, probably she has been an incredibly effective and forceful advocate for access to broadband services and next generation technology for 2 decades. And if anything, this pandemic has shown that being able to be on the grid, to be able to be on programs like this, to be able to have access to high-speed technologies is not a luxury. It's absolutely mandatory for everybody in the society. And she has been and will continue to be a champion on that. So excited for Commissioner Rosenworcel and that announcement. We also had the announcement this week that Marianne Carter is going to be resigning her post at the National Endowment for the Arts, along with some other of her top leadership. She took that job in an incredibly difficult circumstance, working for an administration that intended to eliminate the agency, really didn't show a lot of interest in the NEA. And she ran a really good ship for a number of years, and the NEA has done very important work under her tenure. And we really appreciate her service. And frankly, I think speaking personally, appreciate that, by resigning, she is clearing the way for Biden to put together the team he wants to see at the NEA. And again, as we've talked about extensively in these programs, one of the things that we're looking forward to is a more holistic approach across the federal government in terms of the role of arts and culture as it impacts all agencies and all aspects of policy. So having for the President Biden to have his choice in at the National Endowment is going to help sort of allow that to come together a little bit easier in terms of what shape that eventually takes. And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the coming months. Last little piece and sort of a teaser for next week. Many of you saw the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was confirmed, is on track to be confirmed. I lost track of exactly where that is because I got distracted by a piece of art that came out last night from our dear friend Dessa. Dessa will be one of our guests next week. She's been on our program before. We're excited to check in with her. But if you haven't seen this and want a distraction, Dessa, who was part of the Hamilton mixtape, responded to President Biden's suggestion that Janet Yellen should have her version of a Hamilton song, which Dessa then wrote and recorded with Laserbeak and others, and that was on Marketplace last night. So Alex put that link in the chat. Fun. It's fun to see fun art being made in a complicated time. And again, we can't wait to have Dessa join us next week to talk about all things in her life. So with that, again, we are so thrilled and honored to have our guests today. Again, the format, for those of you who have not joined us before, if you would like to, don't feel obligated. If you'd like to, please feel free to just say hi in the chat in terms of who you are and where you're joining from. Again, don't do that if you don't want to. We'll be taking some questions from the Q&A window as we go through the day. Our program, again, will be archived and on our Music Policy Forum program archive as of this weekend. So if you see something that you enjoyed and want to share with friends, we encourage you to do that. And with that, let's welcome Tom Chauncey, Nadia Prescher, and Frank Riley from the National Independent Talent Organization. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Nice to be back. This
is, we've talked about this on this program. Tom, you and I have talked about this. We talked about this at the Music Policy Forum Intensive. In November, as somebody who's done work at the intersection of music and advocacy and public policy for 22 years, we never would have wanted, obviously, I mean, this past year, what everybody's gone through, everybody's going through is just an unspeakable tragedy and nothing that we take any solace or enjoyment from. But one thing that has been incredibly inspiring to me and to others, many others, has been the emergence of advocacy voices and organizations that have come out to sort of put some infrastructure around different perspectives in the music community that maybe have not been organized or as engaged in some of these policy debates and fights previously. And NITO is certainly high in the list of the organizations that we really admire and we're excited about. So just to start, if you don't mind, we're going to just put links again to your businesses and to who you are and to NITO in the chat, but why don't we start and just ask you to introduce yourself, just talk a tiny bit about who you are, what you do, what your day job is, and then bring that into a little bit about NITO. And then after we go through the three of you, Nadia, I'm going to ask you to kind of walk us through an infographic you developed to kind of give a broader sense of what the role is that you all fill, that NITO members fill in the ecosystem. So Frank, I think you're board president. I forget your exact title. So why don't we start with you since you were represented as running the show. I don't know that you actually are, but why don't we start with you if we could, Frank?
I would never pretend to run any show, but I'm the president of NITO, maybe by default. I started High Road Touring in Sausalito, California in 2000, and that's my day job. That's my focus. That's what I do. We represent a lot of independent touring artists, and we're proud of it. Just as one brief thing, NITO was formed in early April as a response to some ongoing situations and some clarity about the disaster that was looming in front of us. And we all joined together early to mid-April. And I've got to say, it's been one of the most cooperative and wonderful experiences that I've had in the music business. Tom?
It's amazing. Tom, why don't we turn to you?
Yeah, thanks. I would echo that as well. I mean, we're an industry that's always been sort of a bunch of rebels and independents, and in fact, we all are these small independent agencies that decided that we needed to have we needed to share information and come together because we are facing with this unprecedented pandemic, which, I mean, nobody saw this train wreck coming. And nobody, I mean, at the time when we got together, nobody understood the length and the challenges that we've now been living with for quite a long time. Like Frank, I run a talent agency. I'm based in Sausalito, just down the street from Frank. We've been doing it for 20 years. I think our anniversary is within a few days of each other. We similarly represent a small and devoted roster of great, cool, interesting artists, and we fight to build careers for them, and that's our business. And I'm just happy that we figured out, I think, a way to survive this. And Michael, like, I think back a month ago or so when we spoke, that was before the bill passed. That was before we knew that we'd have some legislation and some support from our government. And if you would have asked me, I don't know, 10 months ago, whether anything like this would be possible, I would have just thought it would have been, unfathomable to imagine. So here we are, and it's pretty remarkable, the energy that our small organization has come together, and the way we've been able to connect with other people. I love the idea that the industry is actually gaining a voice, and that voice has been heard, and it's a remarkable thing. So I'll leave it there, and we can talk more. But Nadia, over to you.
Awesome, yeah, Nadia.
Thank you. So my name's Nadia. I founded Madison House in Athens, Georgia, in the mid '90s, and then relocated to Boulder, Colorado, in the late '90s. And I see we've got some Coloradoans here from Denver and the University of Colorado Music Business Program. Welcome. I'd love to reconnect with you guys a little bit later. Like Frank and Tom, I've been doing this a long time, and I've had the pleasure of working with both of them well before Madison House was founded. I think that we all agree that some of us stand out a little bit in our industry and are proud of it and take pleasure in doing things a little bit differently. For those of you who are on the call that are not familiar with what NITO is, we are a talent organization of about 250 different talent agencies and independent management firms. So we have thousands of members, and as Frank mentioned, we founded out of the need that kind of came upon us in April, when we realized that we had no corporate support of our businesses, and we needed a collective voice for our specific needs. And so we're representing not only ourselves, but our thousands of members who are independent agents and independent managers. We also have associate members, some artists, photographers, crew workers, but our paid membership is focused on agents and managers, and that's where we spend the majority of our time.
So Nadia, let me ask you, let's just for fun, I mean, again, part of what is so exciting and the reason this particular Friday show has been such a joy for us to do is that we have such a cross section of perspectives. And one of the things that, I think we certainly have known for a long time, but has accelerated in the last year is just the real interest from policymakers and others to understand the industry that they maybe haven't thought much about, And so maybe, I know you've got an infographic, Alex, maybe you could pull it up. If you could kind of walk through, if you're going into a congressional office and you're meeting with a 27-year-old staff kid who really knows nothing except they like to go see bands at clubs, how do you talk to them about sort of like what this ecosystem looks like, and how do NITO members kind of fit into that? Alex, do you mind, pulling that graphic up?
So as you'll see here, Michael, we recognized early on that a lot of our efforts at first came down to education and trying to help legislators know of our important place in kind of the grander creative economy. And, we used this graphic to try and highlight some of the specific struggles that our part of the industry had to the reopening process and COVID regulations. And so, because of COVID, we were not really able to meet with any of the congressional representatives in person. So we did do, a lot of what we called them fly-ins. We did a lot of Zoom meetings We met with both sides of the aisle to try and explain who we were and how we fit into this ecosystem. There was a study done in Chicago that highlighted that $1 spent, at a concert. I know many of you have heard this already, but $1 spent at a concert equates to $12 in the local economy. And until we really got into that and looked at it, it seemed like a big number. But when we saw people paying for parking, babysitting, going out to eat, potentially flying in for that show, hotel, transportation, et cetera, all the way down to maybe a ticket taker, all the way up to a manager, janitorial staff. I mean, it really ran the gamut. And so I think this image here kind of illustrates how many different people are involved in the show, in between a fan and an artist, and how important it is for what we do as part of the ecosystem, and how important it is that these businesses stayed in business, and that that we contribute significantly, and that we were viable businesses before COVID, and how important not just managers and talent agencies were, but all of these people on this graphic are, as part of the contribution that the music industry places on local and national economy.
Well, we're getting some great feedback in the chat, Nadia. People, Katie Tutton from Hideout giving you a big high five for the graphic, and Ben London from Black Friday asking if it's something that is possible to be shared. I don't know if you have a link to it online, or it's possible we can talk about that offline, but that's a great illustration of kind of the complexity of this piece. And again, we always talk about ecosystems. There are a lot of other ways to talk about it, but we always talk about the interdependent nature of our community, and that you take out valuable pieces of it and the whole thing just doesn't work. And certainly, I think when you think about the NITO perspective, I'd like to ask y'all to go a little bit deeper in terms of when you think about the ecosystem being all the different pieces that have to kind of function. It's easier, not easier, but for people, again, thinking about the sort of alchemy that led to $15 billion of funding, through the Save Our Stages Act, which is, again, more money than the collective budgets. If you add up 50 years of funding for the NEA and 50 years of funding for the NEH, it's below $15 billion. I mean, just a historic number going into the system. In some ways, it feels easier to get your head around, like the 930 Club, First Avenue, like physical space. So how did you talk about the role that you all play in terms of more of that human connection, and the role that you play to make sure that the industry is functioning, because the artists are being placed in the right buildings and everything's being handled, and all the sort of the logistical complexities of making live entertainment, live music work?
When NITO was started, it was really obvious that we couldn't exist as independent agencies and managers without the continued viability of the independent music community also. So that involved clubs. NITO and NEVA have been closely aligned from the very beginning. And I think based on that infographic, you can see the interdependence of how important each of these entities are to the continuing progress and the production of shows and live music. One of the things that I think that infographic was meant to address was the idea that entertainment, art, music was a luxury. It's not a luxury. It's a functional, vital part of our communities, and it's a place where new adventures happen in new towns and new cities, new communities, new neighborhoods. They're vital to the development of those things. All you have to do is look at some place like First Avenue. When it started 50 years ago, that was an abandoned bus terminal in central Minneapolis without anything around it except a rather unseemly group of people hanging out in the alley behind it, and somewhat dangerous. But now it's in the middle of a vital and vibrant downtown. The Target Center is right across the street. That property is very much more valuable than it was when it started. And it represents evidence of what that meant to that development of that city. So that's part of what NITO's about, making that connection. Tom and Nadia.
Yeah, well, Frank, and that story is duplicated in cities all across America. Here in San Francisco, I'd say, for example, the Independent, a great club here in town, that corridor in this city, it was one of the leaders that helped transform that corridor to what were previously basically unvisited businesses to a super vibrant couple of blocks with bars and restaurants and nightlife, et cetera, et cetera. Then the community, the surrounding community where people are living becomes a more viable place to live. So that idea that the music, the performing arts venues are drivers for economic stability and growth is really, I mean, so easy to see. And that was a big part of our, this process has really been getting together with representatives and trying to articulate that in a way that they could see. And when we turned it into the economic, I think a lot of the, there's two tracks on the conversation in my mind here. One is the cultural value of what the arts represent. And for example, I couldn't point to anything more inspirational than the poet who gave her incredible speech at the inaugural, for example. What more do you need to demonstrate, something that's uplifting and inspirational? And then there's the economic side of it. What Frank and Nadia were just talking about, that injection to the community. So we've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of folks just to point out those two things, and thankfully, I think we were heard, and it's pretty remarkable. But
absolutely miraculous, honestly. I still marvel at it. And and the bill that was written originally was co-authored by a Republican, John Cornyn, and a Democrat, Amy Klobuchar. So, what that means to me or to NITO, to all of us, is that people heard us, and not the people always that were predictable either. This was a bipartisan bill. It was supported by, Nadia will probably remember the exact number, but a lot of co-sponsors on that. And that's part of the reason why it passed.
Well, and it makes me I guess this is sort of my show, so I can make it about myself a tiny bit, but not but I think just about, the two sort of underlying philosophies of Future Music Coalition when we started that back in the late 90s, which first was that the decisions made in Washington have a lot more to do with the structures of the music economy than people want to think about sometimes. And the second is that the only way to guarantee failure in the policy process is to not get involved and not do it. And I think, if nothing else, our hope is, again, this comes out of a moment of crisis, and nobody wanted to be in this moment, of course, but hopefully this becomes a starting point to create a richer understanding of, again, what are the needs of our community and how can and should they be addressed, whether it's through policy or through funding or through all the different sort of mechanisms of government. Because I think, Tom, I think this is your point, and Nadia, I think you touched on this as well. We think about, the essential, music is not video games. Music is not, widgets. Music is something that's very essential and human, to our humanity. And we need to, really have a much more sort of intentional understanding of how these pieces fit together. I mean, in the live entertainment industry, we've lived through 25 years of serious consolidation, of a lot of just sort of challenges and barriers. Most local promoters or venues have either little relationship with their local government or a complicated relationship with the local government. We see cycle after cycle of live music being the energy, just like you said, Minneapolis, we see in DC, H Street Northeast becoming the driver of massive redevelopment, but no real appreciation for why the venues, how the venues help make that happen. We need to have a complete paradigm shift. And that starts with, again, organizations like you coming together to really spur those conversations to say, okay, let's get started, on this point. Sorry for speechifying. So I want to talk a little bit about your take on where we are right now with the Shuttered Venues bill and the rollout and the information campaign. Again, the NIVA side of this has been a little bit easier just in terms of venues, understanding sort of who qualifies from a venue standpoint. So how does it work more from a talent agency or management standpoint? Like what information do you have at this point? What are you looking to get from Small Business Administration? And do you have any sense of timeline on that?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, we're absolutely gathering information. There's a lot of gray area on the bill, and it's subject to interpretation. We've been advised that until the Biden appointees actually take their positions at the head of these organizations, that we won't get a lot of clarity. But we're working toward that. And Nadia and Tom want to weigh
Yeah,
in here?
the information that we do have available thus far, Alex has dropped our COVID relief tab that we have on our website. Not only do we cover the shuttered venues operator bill there, but we also added information for some of our associate members, and honestly, anyone. You don't have to be a member to go to this part of the website, of course, but we do cover the second round of PPP information that we have thus far, and also information about the pandemic unemployment assistance and the extension of that, which has also been very important to us. Most people might not realize that when we originally started this advocacy and fight for our members, we were very much on board with Restart, which was also a bipartisan bill that was being discussed, also with Senator Young, who's a Republican in Indiana, and Senator Bennett, our Democratic senator here in Colorado. And I wanted to give a shout out to Danny from Mishawaka and also Dr. Michael Seaman from Colorado State University. I think it's always amazing to see how many people from Colorado show up to music events. If you run a zip report on festivals across the country, you will see a significant amount of people from Colorado. But back to the question, that link, we try and keep it as up to date as possible. We also suggest going to the SBA site that we link out, and they're doing, the best job that they can. They are probably, understaffed and trying to work as quickly as possible and deal with the pandemic and get money out to people who need it. As Frank mentioned, some of the language, is a little bit tricky. We've been strongly advocating for people to work with a lawyer or a business manager to help them navigate, these new waters that are in front of us.
Nadia, go ahead, Tom, please.
One quick thing, which I think is pretty important, that just kind of came down last night. We were looking for clarity on the question of is it possible to apply for a second round of PPP and SVOG at the same time. And we just got information last night that basically said you can apply for one or the other. And if you have applied for the second round of PPP, that disqualifies you from applying for SVOG, which is, huge information. So if people are trying to understand which is the right thing for them, please know that. I got that right, guys? Yeah,
you did. Yeah.
Okay.
And Tom, as we were talking about before on our pre-call, I mean, the mysteries of DC were not revealed to any of us prior to our engagement here, starting with NITO. I mean, my goodness gracious, I thought I was a political animal. Not even close. Those are big lions in the jungle, and they're going to eat everybody if you're not careful. Anyway.
I think anyone who applied for the original PPP also saw that, the rules and regulations changed, mid-loan. And so we're trying to get the information out, as quickly as possible. But we highly suggest everyone to stay tuned to the SBA site, because they're the ones who ultimately are the holders of the information and getting the information out.
Yeah, and one of the challenges, and I just, Nadia, I think you said it really well. I think we all have a great deal of empathy for what is a completely unprecedented task taking place in an unprecedented time with a leadership transition, and there's a lot going on. And so, I know that the team at the SBA, the career officials, the new officials are going to be coming in as part of the Biden team. They have every incentive to try to make this as transparent and as effective as possible. Again, when we talk about $15 billion, nobody really knows how far $15 billion goes. How many organizations are going to qualify under the rules, which, again, I think I think the general consensus is that people really admire how tightly the rules were written to sort of make sure that we've got one particular sort of sector as qualifying. It'll be difficult for this money to be cannibalized by the larger corporate interests that often kind of suck away with federal money. I mean, we'll see how that plays. And then there's going to be probably 2 more opportunities for federal funding coming in 2021. So they're going to do another round of relief funding, which is probably going to be in March. And then there's going to be the infrastructure bill, which is probably going to be in September. So I know a lot of people are eager to see sort of how this rollout takes place. And then if there are organizations that don't fit for whatever reason for this type of program. Maybe there needs to be an expanded language or a second wave of funding or additional. I mean, everybody's in a very entrepreneurial sort of mindset here in Washington, certainly more so than I've ever seen, to try to make sure that we're figuring out where the gaps are and how to fill those gaps.
There have also been some really good state, I'm sorry, Frank. There have also been some really good state grants that have been out. And while it would be too cumbersome for us to try and collect that information, we have been highlighting for NITO members and anyone in the music industry to be on a mailing list with your current state government, because we've seen some people really benefit who need it from some state grants.
Yep.
This morning, the SBA, the current person who's running the SBA, the governmental employee, said that there may be as many as 27,000 applicants for the SVOG grant. That's a huge number. And we have no idea how far that $15 billion is going to go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What we do know, or we can anticipate, is we're going to, as a community, going to have to do some very effective quantitative and qualitative storytelling about where these grants go. And that's going to be the other piece of it. We're going to have to track the money, and people are going to have to really be able to demonstrate what they did with the funds. And then we're going to have a, again, be able to tell a story. And Frank, you said this really well. This thing happened because it was nonpartisan. This thing happened because Democrats and Republicans worked together in support of culture. And if they come out of this thing and there's a sense in a year, a sense in 18 months, that this was a good endeavor, that it made sense, that it met the needs or attempted to, address the needs of the community and the people who needed it, that completely resets the cultural conversation about what we can do long-term. And if instead it feels like it was a boondoggle or a botch or hurried or counterproductive, or everybody's like yelling at each other, then that's just going to kind of cut that off. And so that's the other thing I know a lot of people are really engaging with. Yeah, Frank.
One last thing before we get cut off here. I got to say, really strongly that the one thing that we're going forward and advocating beyond this this bill and this grant and the advocacy for NITO and the community around us is mask wearing, vaccinations. Yep. And once we get through this process, we'll all return to viable businesses. We'll all become essential members of our community again. And hopefully we can get back to where we were before this whole thing unfolded. That's the big goal. So any ideas about how we can amplify our voice to get people to, sign up and sign on and, protect themselves and their community and advocate for vaccinations, we're all about it.
Amazing.
It's our next step.
So to build off of what Nadia was saying, just to kind of wrap this segment, and I'm going to have a kind of final question for you all, but again, if you're looking for information on this, SBA is consolidating questions. They're going to be coming out with an FAQ. They're going to do the best they can to push out information. What they put out publicly is going to be the official thing to go by. So again, hopefully they're going to have a lot of transparency and not too many gray areas. Amy has a great question in the chat, which I would imagine that nobody wants to say that we definitively know the difference between if you've applied for but haven't received a second round of PPP, if that kicks you out, or only if you've received second round of PPP. I mean, I think all those detailed questions are still kind of being resolved. I don't know if Tom, Frank, or Nadia, you feel like you
shouldn't apply for a second round of PPP if you're going to apply for a SVOG grant.
Yeah.
That will likely shove you out of the line for that grant.
Okay. Yep. And thank you, Lara, for clarifying that also in the chat. And then again, NITO is doing everything it can. Again, Nadia, thank you for dropping that in the chat. So you're pushing out information to your stakeholders. NEVA has got the implementation task force. Again, Music Policy Forum. We're going to be talking about this every Friday and be hosting events around this stuff. So we think we're pretty confident as a community that we're going to be pushing out as much information as we can. And hopefully people feel like they can get access to the resources and experts they need to help navigate it. Clearly, what we know is you got to get your 2019 books figured out. So if you're going to want to be involved in any of this stuff, you're going to have to really make sure that you're documenting loss and you're working with your team and don't put a lot of work into these grant proposals if you are not in a position to sort of document that loss, which is a concern for a lot of our music venues and others that maybe work on more of a cash type basis and maybe don't have the records that they may that might be helpful. Last question for you guys. We're packing a lot into this, so I apologize. We could go like 3 hours just with you guys, but and I asked this of all of our guests, and it's just kind of a fundamental exercise to just, and actually, Frank, you teed this up a second ago, visualizing, a point in the future, and we don't know if it's 6 months, 9 months, a year, but COVID's behind us. We're back up and running. We're into the next, wherever the new normal is. Do you have a sense of NITO and the field and how this experience in the last year sort of inspired you thinking longer term about where you fit into a post-crisis world? I mean, just in terms of being an advocacy organization or just promoting the interests or understand the interests of your particular constituency?
I think, the independent music community has never had a voice on its behalf. I think that's what we look forward to, is addressing the next problems that collectively affect all of us and affect our musical community. And we hope to remain an effective voice in the future. And Nadia and Tom will speak better than I, for sure.
It's been obviously a wonderful victory, but we're going to continue to advocate for the specific needs of our membership moving forward. We've seen that a lot of other associations have been together for a long time, and we've only been together now since April, while we've been working as maybe competitors for 20 years plus, maybe 30 for some. We're now finding that we are figuring out ways to work hand in hand. I mean, we're going to also continue to offer resources as we get them. Alex here has dropped a couple more links in the chat that I think will be helpful. But we're going to continue to work on having a united voice for our membership, and if there's other uncertain territory that we come across, we won't have to build an organization at the same time as dealing with a catastrophe simultaneously.
That's right. And
Yeah.
Tom, anything in closing? Yeah.
No, I think I would just add on top of that is I think sort of like the more you come together and talk about your problems, the more you realize how much you have in common. And what we've found out is that while we're addressing our short-term crisis here, we realize that coming together, we're going to have the ability to address other issues down the road. And Michael, to your point a second ago about the responsibility of implementing this and implementing it properly, and so we can show that this sort of support benefits accurately as it should, and what message that can send back to the government, and how the government then can look to us in the future. That's an exciting idea, and I hope that organizations like ours and others that have come together that now have advocacy, we can continue that process and try and find ways to remind the public and our representatives the importance of the arts and what we do.
I think you don't have to look any further, as Tom said, than the inauguration, no matter what side of the aisle you were on, to see the power of music and bringing people together and being inspiring. And that's what we're going to continue to advocate for as well.
That's awesome. Well, Frank, Nadia, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited about what you're doing with NITO and can't wait to hear more. And as we bring Carson Elrod in, this actually links up really, really well, because Carson is one of the co-founders of Be an Arts Hero, another organization that was founded in the nightmare hellscape of 2020 and is really as part of a big community. This is not the Carson Show, as part of a big community that is really driving a complete refresh and rethink about how do we think about cultural advocacy and the role of the federal government. Carson, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you as always.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I have really loved listening to that conversation. And as somebody whose father lives in Estes Park, Colorado, I can affirm that Colorado people are rock and roll people.
But Carson, we're going to put some background links to kind of your broader role in life as an actor and as a connector and others just in the chat. And we're going to put in there a wonderful piece of journalism out of the Washington Post, just kind of a profile of the work that you've been doing at Be an Arts Hero. But why don't we just start, for those who have not heard of your organization, to kind of start with 10,000 feet. What is Be an Arts Hero? How did you form, and what is your main mission?
Well, just listening to NITO talk about their situation, it feels very much in alignment with ours and our experience. Ours is an organization that came together, I lost 3 jobs on March 12th. And then pretty soon the CARES Act came, and that FPUC at $600 really contemplated putting a floor underneath me and most people that I knew. And so we were just like, okay, we're going to wait this out for a couple months. And then even within that couple months, and you guys will very much appreciate this on the NITO side, I had friends who were saying, well, my agents dropped me because without commissions, they can't survive their closing. So really established talent agencies here in New York were folding, even with the CARES Act, even in those early days. And then all of a sudden, I had a friend who was a clown with the Cirque du Soleil. The Cirque du Soleil goes bankrupt. All of a sudden, he's stranded in Houston for 3 months, and then, watching the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater closed, and all of a sudden the Second City is up for sale. And it's just like, even during those first few months, you saw that without being able to be open, without being able to be full of people, without the engine of the creative economy, just functioning at full bore, it was already starting to dissolve. And then as we were getting closer and closer to the end of the CARES Act funding, on a very personal note, everybody that I knew was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do without that federal pandemic unemployment compensation. So that's when a bunch of us started to kind of like look into, okay, what did the CARES Act actually do? And we were like, okay, it looks like 11 billion kind of went into the creative economy, but there was only 75 million earmarked for the NEA. And then we started to make some calls to legislators, and a very, very powerful one early on said, well, you guys are actors and part of this. I mean, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you guys aren't squeaking too much. And we were like, okay, point taken, heard. And so we just started in June and July to like open up our phone books. And, in the beginning, we were like, okay, all we got to do is get Lin-Manuel Miranda to come out and say one thing. And if he comes out and says the arts need help, then we're going to get an $80 billion bailout. We'll be fine. So Lin, it's all on Lin. You know what I mean? And it's like, then you realize it's like, no, Lin is up to his eyeballs on 18 projects and getting Joe Biden elected and everything else. So we realized, it's like, okay, we've all been kind of pushed out the side of a building. We're all in free fall, and the options are to kind of assume the crash position or build a rocket ship as you fall. And so that's what we started to do, is we just started to call everybody that we knew. I one night in late June just got on social media and started grabbing the Instagram handles and the Twitter handles and just started to like set up a very basic infrastructure. And then within a month, we had like a core leadership team and volunteers that were starting to work with us. And we were like having town halls, and we were talking to industry leaders across disciplines. And then Matthew Lee Earlbach wrote this open letter to the 116th Senate, which was this kind of cri de coeur from the creative economy that said, hey, listen, we really have an apples to apples comparison here, that the 10 airlines kind of weigh in from a BEA point of view as almost an exact analog on value added to the economy, right? And it's like, okay, $50 billion of relief for 10 airlines. And then with the compromise bill, I think there was another $20 billion. Well, okay, the creative economy is 675,000 small businesses, 5.1 million Americans. This is clearly a sector at 4.5% of GDP that needs to be stabilized. We're part of the economy. We're a cornerstone of the economy. And not only that, everybody in this Zoom knows that we're anchors. Like when the Muni Theater in St. Louis shuts down and doesn't have a season, 4 restaurants closed permanently. So our health is necessary for the overall health of the U.S. economy. We're pivotal to transportation, to tourism, to 68% of tourism is for arts and culture activities. So we really it like came together in this way. And like at the beginning, as we were doing this, we were totally neophytes to all of it. But we just said, we're going to just start calling. We're going to just start lobbying. And once that letter came out and it was published in American Theater Magazine, it got over 16,000 signatures. And what was exciting about those signatures, it was everybody from, Glenn Close and Kevin Kline and Rosario Dawson to, the artistic director of the Dance Theater of Harlem, to the Billings Symphony in Montana, to the High Plains Museum in New Mexico. We got this real critical mass of kind of a cross-cultural, cross-sector constituency. We were able to finally get people up and out of their silos and into kind of a common message. And we put out this kind of flagship number of $44 billion. And we basically just said, based off of Dr. Seaman's work, is we really have this apples to apples comparison. We have basically the exact same value added to the economy of the airlines. It's a nonpartisan understanding that the entire economy needs to be stabilized. We're a huge part of the economy. We need that stabilization. So we just started I think our first call was with Tom Tillis's office, and we got that meeting because Jen Lyon is kind of a TV star. She's from North Carolina. So we got that meeting and we went in, and we had never done anything like that before, but we created a North Carolina policy brief. We went in, we talked to his office about what was going on in North Carolina, what was going on in Raleigh and Winston-Salem. And we really pitched hard. And even though we were new to it and bumping around in there and tripping all over ourselves and frankly scared, it was positive. And we started to be in dialogue with that office. And that office was a Republican office, right? So right out of the gate, we went straight to a place that we were kind of afraid to go. We were afraid we were, because of our own experience with this idea that arts and culture is partisan or something. We were afraid we were going to go in and, get laughed out of the room or told that we're not important. And when we made this socioeconomic argument, it really landed. And then that gave us confidence as we really put together a brief team. We have 10 people that create these granular city by city, state by state briefs that we go into these meetings with. And over the course of the summer, we went into over 60 Senate offices and a dozen House offices. Obviously, we're concentrated on the Senate because that's where the action needed to happen. And we just felt like we got better and better and better at it. And what started to become amazing is we were doing that work while turning up these public pressure campaigns, because we want to take advocacy out of back rooms and put it on the front page of the Washington Post. We want to take advocacy, and that's one of the things that NIVA did, right? I mean, if you can have the Foo Fighters singing songs and jumping around and smashing guitars and saying save our stages, that's going to have a little bit more impact than a call to a Senate office. It's just going to. And we have a unique opportunity in the creative economy if we get out of our silos, if we come together, if we harness our talent and our imagination and everything that we have to offer, we can be an incredibly powerful lobby on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of the sector. And we are now at a point where, the night that the compromise bill was signed, a lot of these legislative offices wrote us that night and were like, okay, Save Our Stages has crossed the finish line. What do we do next? And that's really exciting to feel like you're in that kind of dialogue, that they're not just placating you or being like, yes, it's very nice to hear from you, arts people, but the idea that we're helping them metabolize the size and scope of the problem, the catastrophe, and not just the importance of stabilizing our sector, but how we can defibrillate the United States economy on the other side of this with a growth rate of double that of the rest of the economy, with Richard Florida and Michael Seaman's work showing that wherever arts and culture is, there's going to be an economic hotspot. If you're pitching an American Rescue Plan Well, an American Rescue Plan has to have a huge cornerstone of the creative economy in it. Because if you want to defibrillate the United States economy, that's us. That's where we are. That's what we're doing. So I've been monologuing for a long time. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but that's kind of where we started and like the wave that we're surfing and the direction that we're trying to head in.
Just tee up Carson and watch him go. No, I love it. I love it. It's so good. And I think, I mean, just a couple observations, both in terms of your work and NITO and others. I mean, I think one is, sort of an ironic way, Zoom has sort of unlocked the ability to start these organizations in such an effective grassroots way. And we see that with our work with the Reopen Every Venue Safely initiative as well. And you wouldn't be hitting, 70 Hill offices if you had to do a traditional DC fly-in, right? And get 200 people on an airplane to go to the, Hilton to get cocktails and go walk on the Hill. I mean, so it's interesting how Zoom has sort of unlocked the ability to have more access because, policymakers, again, Hill staff, they love to talk arts, right? I mean, the job of a Hill staffer sucks. I mean, it is a hard job. You are spending all day being told by powerful lobbyists to tell your boss to do something your boss doesn't want to do. And when you get to talk about what's happening in the arts in your community or what's happening in the broader industry, they're curious. It's not political 9 times out of 10. I mean, they want to kind of figure it out. They may have different interpretations what you do with it, but they always want the conversation. And one thing I really admire and hold up about what Being Arts Hero is doing is, it gets into the sort of non-transactional advocacy that we talk about, like have the conversation, build the relationships, have the goal, right? I mean, it's amazing to have the goal of 44 billion, but you're in there to have let's kind of put the pieces together, right? Let's figure it out. I think the other thing, which is obvious, I think to people on this call, but I think we should just say it for the sake of saying it, is, with absolutely no disrespect to a lot of really hard work that's going on for a really long time in arts advocacy. Something I've said, for 20 years is we can't look at like a 5% increase or decrease in NEA funding as some sort of proxy for cultural policy. We need to have a bigger, broader, more complicated conversation, which again is something that you and others are kind of spurring to kind of, again, reframe this and rethink it. So Carson, let's turn a little bit towards, all right, so just like you said, SOS passed. What do you feel like is next in terms of your priorities? Like, what are the things that you organizationally are looking for? And how do you see the coalitions kind of coming together to kind of help inform what that might be?
Well, I just want to say how much respect I have for NITO and NEVA and the Touring Professionals Alliance and Roadie Cares. And there have been, because we all got pushed out the side of the building, for those of us that are building the rocket ships as we fall, it's incredibly inspiring. And I just want to say that we're so in alignment with what Nadia said. Like we're not just doing all this advocacy, but we're trying to build ourselves as an official organization. So like doing those two things concurrently is just an unbelievable amount of work. And I just want to say how much I respect you guys and identify and empathize with where you are, because we're there too. But it really can't be understated. The idea that an organization that didn't exist a year ago was able to craft a $15 billion legislative football and run it into the end zone within 9 months of existence. That is incredible. And it shows you the power of the creative economy. And when we get together and we use our resources and we use our talent and we use arts workers to be the face of the creative economy to like really lift our voices literally about these things, we can really move the cultural conversation. So I think our overall objectives is to keep doing that. So just as you were talking about with like traditional advocacy approaches, the idea that it's like, okay, we're only going to talk to arts caucus members, or we're only, one of the most exciting conversations we had, we went into David Perdue's office. We didn't know if he was going to keep his seat or not keep his seat, but we were excited to go in there and just tell him and his staff about the fact that Georgia has a 7.2% growth rate in the creative economy, in the arts and culture sector in Georgia. It's like the #1 growth rate of the state of Georgia. And so we think that we change the conversation by having the conversation. So we're going to have that conversation with every single office. It's going to take us time to get through all 535 members of Congress, but we're going to go to every single one of them, and we're going to have this conversation, and we're going to keep the conversation going. As it pertains to like immediate objectives right now, what we are trying to do is, as I said, after the compromise bill was signed, a lot of legislative people got back in touch with us and said, okay, that was step one. What's step two? And our point of view is step two is to kind of come back to this idea of something that is on par with the relief given to the airlines, is to understand that our sector, even more than the airlines, was completely closed down. And airlines have been quasi-functional during this time. We closed down in March, and Fauci said that he thinks that live venues are probably going to be able to come back online in September, is what he's thinking. Yeah. So that's another 9 months. Yeah. That's another 9 months. So $15 billion, that's okay for now. But obviously, if we want an American rescue plan that really rescues the United States economy, there's 4.5% of it that is really precariously positioned right now. And so part of that American rescue plan has to contemplate what we're hoping would be a significant investment. Obviously, we think that NEA, NEH, IMLS, CPB should be like hyper-funded with Looney Tunes anvils of money falling on them, but also more SBA oriented money for the for-profit sector and for for-profit businesses. One of our earliest partners was the Costume Industry Coalition, who makes like costumes for everything, for cruise ships, for Broadway, for opera, for everything. Well, they don't qualify for Save Our Stages. They're not enumerated as somebody who qualifies. And they're like, okay, we don't want to have to compete with Shake Shack for PPP either. We're in this position where what we need more than anything is rent relief. And if Broadway wants to come back in September and flip the lights on, well, if you want costumes on anybody, you got to put a floor under that sector. So we're like representing so many constituencies, especially the 2.7 million unemployed arts workers. So what we're going to push for more than anything is like really robust federal pandemic unemployment compensation as part of that. That's already in there, but it would be ideal to have it return to that 600, and it would be super ideal to have it retroactive to August 1st when so many people lost it. So many people right now are only in their homes because of that eviction moratorium. Right. That's the only reason why a lot of arts workers are still in their apartments. So getting retroactive FPUC is a priority, expanding it to 600 is a priority, and then contemplating more dedicated earmarked money. And then we are huge fans of Americans for the Arts putting creative workers to work proposal, which contemplates how the federal government can more actively take part in getting creatives, integrating them into all sectors of the government. And one of the things that's in there, a lot of people have been talking about it. We've been talking about it. AFTA's been talking about it. The idea of an executive level position, whether that's a Secretary of Arts and Culture, somebody on the Domestic Policy Council, but literally just having somebody with a seat at the table to speak on behalf of the creative economy and guide policy. When you think that during the Trump administration alone, there's like 20 to 30 billion dollars of agricultural subsidies, the creative economy, we're 5 times bigger than American agriculture in value added to GDP. Like we need to have a seat at the Domestic Policy Council so that we can be having these kind of conversations.
Yeah, and that's part of what is just going to be fascinating over the next month or so in the weeds in terms of structurally, again, how is the administration going to handle that? I would argue that the experience that we saw with Michael Pack and the Broadcast Board of Governors and all the mischief he made at Voice of America and other institutions are a little bit of a warning sign in terms of not giving too much institutional power to any one administration that may look to have influence on culture in ways that maybe we wouldn't want to see. But that's, again, part of what is exciting to me and a lot of other people about the experience of the Biden team, that they've been in the government, they've thought about the government, they have a pretty good understanding of the levers. And again, whether it's a position at Domestic Policy Council or whether it's an interagency work group or, whatever mechanism kind of comes out, we have a lot of confidence and hope and frankly expectation that it's going to be really, really robust. We've had some great comments in chat and we're almost at time, Carson. So we're gonna kind of have to do some closing thoughts. I do want to flag that at least one member of my board at Music Policy Forum apparently wants to jump ship and now work for your organization. So I will take that as a compliment to you. But people want to know how do they plug in? We put the relevant links in chat, but people that want to get involved in your organization, find out more. I know you're overwhelmed, so I mean, you guys don't have a ton of bandwidth, but what is the best sort of pathway for that?
Well, right now we've just launched 100 Days of Arts and Activism on our website, on our socials. Obviously the first 100 days of administration are key. So the more that we can raise our voices to the new administration, we just launched this playwright initiatives where over 275 incredible, talented American playwrights wrote an open letter to the incoming administration about their hopes and dreams for arts and culture and the creative economy. So that's great. Go to beanartshero.com. Follow us at beanartshero on Twitter, beanartshero on Instagram. Come follow us. Come get involved. Drop us a line. And the big thing that we're saying is what's represented on this call, what's represented by NITO and NEVA and Be an Arts Hero is please do not wait for somebody to come save you. Don't wait. You are who's coming to save you. The only thing that Be an Arts Hero is doing is we're trying to be a convening entity where people can metabolize and understand your dignity, your value, your worth. You're part of an $877 billion in value added industry. You are so important. You are big business because you are local business in all 50 states. You have every right in any state to pick up the phone and call your senators, call your representatives, and be part of the conversation. Force yourself into the conversation. Build it into your weekly regimen. You live in Kansas, like once a week, be like, hey, Jerry Moran, what are you doing for the creative economy? I live here in Kansas. It's important to me. What are you doing? Thank you. Talk to you next week. You know what I mean? So we want to build this kind of civic engagement into what it means to be in the creative economy, because we have a lot of work to do to change the conversation. But once we have the conversation and change the conversation, there's a real opportunity here. I mean, you want to build back better, we'll do it. We'll do it. And just as Nadia was saying, it's like, just look at the inauguration. Yep. You know what I mean? We are part and parcel to the very most elemental aspects of this country, our democracy, every single part of it. We deserve a bigger seat at the table and more respect, support, and subsidy and investment.
I love it.
And certainly relief.
Something we said for years is that the incremental can lead to the transformational. And part of the incremental work is just what you're saying. It's just being present, just being visible, just having those relationships, having those conversations, looking for opportunities. Carson, thank you as always for joining us. We're big fans of you and the whole team and everything you guys are building. It's fun. Makes me wish that I was your age again, but that's all right. We all get older, and then you guys have to come take.
You'd be surprised. I think you'd be surprised if I told you how old I am.
Well, then you'll make me even sadder. So with that, we have to wrap today's show. Again, thank you so much to Frank, Nadia, Tom, and Carson for joining us. Thank you as always to Alex for doing a wonderful job producing the program. Thank you to all of you who participated and had great questions. Again, this program, like all of our programs, will be on our archive on musicpolicyforum.org early next week, and encourage you to share it with friends and colleagues if you think they would enjoy any of the programming today. If you have questions, comments, gently worded constructive criticism, ideas, or other feedback, always feel free to email us at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. Thank you again. We'll see you next week with Heather Noonan from the League of American Orchestras and the incomparable Dessa. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. Be safe.